Number 4. Bon Voyage. It was May 1845 when the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror sailed from England on an Arctic mission to navigate the Northwest Passage and to study the Earth's magnetic field. This mission required the best officers, crew, and vessels. After all, successfully navigating the Northwest Passage was no small task, and it had been a dream of many sailors for hundreds of years. The Northwest Passage was a water route that linked the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Captains and crews would have to sail south from Europe to Africa around the Cape of Good Hope. Then from there they'd sail the Indian Ocean towards the Pacific. The other option was to sail towards South America and get past the dreaded Tierra del Fuego before sailing up into the Pacific. Both were dreadful voyages, so there had to be an easier way, and that way eluded the best sailors on Earth. After the exploration of the Arctic Circle and the North Pole, sailors knew that the Northwest Passage was no easy feat. It was a treacherous journey through an archipelago of islands surrounded by ice that was moving. Only the best and the most brave would survive. The other part of the mission was to get a better understanding of Earth's magnetic field. This voyage was a way to study the magnetic poles, which would allow for easier navigation. Improving navigational equipment at the time meant using Earth's magnetic field to guide sailors on voyages. The voyage of the Erebus and Terror was led by Sir John Franklin and his crew of 128 men. Franklin had an impressive naval resume going back to 1800 when he was 14 years old. Franklin had been involved in some naval battles, including the Battle of Trafalgar. He'd even sailed to the Arctic and northwestern Canada, but there was one glaring issue with Franklin leading the mission. He hadn't been on a voyage to the Arctic or the Antarctic for nearly 3 decades. However, he was the man selected for the mission. It's also important to note that along the voyage there were 2 very skilled officers named Francis Crozier and James Fitzjames. Crozier was an Irishman born in Banbridge in 1796, and like Franklin, Crozier joined the Navy at a young age. He went on an Arctic voyage to navigate the Northwest Passage when he was 25 years old. It was one of a series of voyages that Crozier went on that were unsuccessful. Crozier's experience on the seas allowed him to develop his scientific skills. So by 1849, he was one of the top minds when it came to studying the Earth's magnetic field. But due to his Irish background, Crozier was never given the respect he deserved from the British. James Fitzjames was an illegitimate child who was born in London, England in 1813, and he too began his career on the seas at a young age, starting when he was just 12 years old. Fitzjames had been adopted into a good family, and his reputation as a sailor was solidified in his 20s. Fitzjames spoke a handful of languages and served during the Opium War in China. He was known for his bravery and was a skilled officer on any ship he was assigned. His past as an illegitimate child followed him his whole career, though. It was a potential career killer at the time, and Fitzjames had built a solid resume. However, he was missing something important. Fitzjames, for all of his honors, had never been on an Arctic expedition. Sir John Franklin had the perfect duo for the voyage. Both the Erebus and Terror were excellent ships and were equipped for Arctic travel. The Terror was the older ship and was built in 1813 as a bomb vessel. The purpose of these ships was to bomb forts or cities that were situated along the coast. The Terror was used during the War of 1812 but was eventually turned into an explorer ship. One of its earliest voyages as an explorer ship was an 1836 trip to the Arctic. The Erebus was the younger ship, and it was built in 1826. Both the Erebus and the Terror were used for an Antarctic expedition that began in 1839. This would be one of many journeys to the region. The 2 ships somehow survived crashing into large chunks of ice floating in the ocean, and during one expedition to the Antarctic, the Erebus and Terror crashed into each other because one of the ships tried to avoid an iceberg. When it was time for Franklin's expedition to the Arctic, both ships had steam-powered engines, and the steam was piped through them as a heating system. The officers and crew would be subject to below-freezing conditions, and they needed not to succumb to hypothermia. For the journey to the Arctic, they had their bows reinforced with additional wood and iron so they could handle sailing through icy waters. The Erebus and Terror had equipment on board to desalinate ocean water for drinking purposes and to power the steam engines. There was also more sophisticated equipment on board that allowed the crew to study the magnetic field of Earth. This expedition would not be easy. The ships Erebus and Terror were supposed to sail to the most frigid parts of Canada and stay there for the winter because of the extremely cold weather and icy conditions. They would be able to navigate the waters and journey the Northwest Passage during the summer when the ice wasn't as big of an issue for the ships. They needed to set sail during the summer because they had 3 months to take advantage of the conditions. They would need plenty of calories to survive, and they had some 8,000 cans of food. Most importantly, there was plenty of alcohol on board the ships to raise morale. There was enough food and drink for the men to last them 3 years. 1,000 books were also available to anyone who wanted to do something to pass the time, other than drink, of course. Number 3, the journey ends. The Erebus and Terror began their journey on May 19, 1845, with 134 officers and crew, and a supply ship, the Barretto Jr., followed them on their first leg. Their initial goal was to make it to Greenland, and they accomplished that in July. There, the ships would be supplied and letters home were sent to Britain on the Barretto. Crew members who faced illness or disciplinary issues during the first part of the journey were assigned to the Barretto for the return trip home. The total officers and crew numbered 129 upon the departure of the supply ship. Their next stop was sailing into the waters of Canada and then reaching Beechy Island, which is located on Devon Island near the Barrow Strait. According to records, they arrived at this location and were scheduled to stay for the winter until the following year. The ships were last spotted by a whaling ship as they sailed into Baffin Bay in July of 1845. The captain of the whaling ship noted that the crew of the Erebus and Terror were in high spirits. And from this point forward, there was no communication from the Erebus and Terror. It was 2 years after they'd set sail that the families of the crew began to worry that the ships had met a terrible fate. Do you think you have what it takes to survive the Arctic? Would you like to see more videos on the subject like this one? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, subscribe. 2. A new search begins. What's known from searches that were conducted from 1854 to the present is that Franklin and his men set up camp on Beechy Island. Tents were discovered at the site, and there was evidence that a blacksmith had set up a work area as well. But the evidence that stood out were the graves. 3 of the men on the mission died and were buried at Beechy Island, and their names were John Hartnell, William Brain, and John Torrington. Both the Erebus and the Terror were frozen in the ice near Beechy Island. The thaw would free their ships eventually, but they had to make do until that happened. They had books, plenty to drink, and a large amount of canned food. But when graves on the island were discovered, something else was found with them, a large pile of cans for the food. So what happened? Usually, if a naval expedition docked somewhere, they would leave something in writing for others to read just in case. But the officers and crew on this expedition didn't adhere to this simple protocol. The graves and the cans were the first clues in the mystery. When Beechy Island was investigated, no ships were located. That means that Franklin and his men decided to go somewhere else, but that somewhere else wasn't known. These men simply vanished. Back in Britain, Lady Jane Franklin, the wife of Sir John Franklin, was persistent in lobbying for a search party to find her husband. It was ignored at first, but her persistence eventually paid off. A reward of £20,000, which in today's market would be well over $600,000 was offered for the finding of Franklin and his crew. This got the attention of certain individuals, and they decided to find Franklin and claim the reward. One journey in 1850 was a joint United States and British search for the ships and crew. They landed at Beechy Island and were the ones that discovered the graves. Ice proved to be an issue, but nothing else was reported until a year later. That's when an iceberg was spotted off the coast of Newfoundland, and according to witnesses, attached to the iceberg were 2 ships, but those who spotted the iceberg couldn't tell if the ships were the Erebus or the Terror. The biggest lead came in 1854, when John Ray was on an Arctic expedition of his own. Ray wasn't searching for the Franklin expedition, though. He was exploring the Boothia Peninsula in the Canadian Arctic. The area Ray was exploring was south of Beechy Island, and during his time in Canada, he met some Inuit people who taught him something shocking. With the help of a local Inuit man named Marco, Ray learned that the Inuit had stories of white men who died on King William Island. Their deaths were possibly dated to 1850, and Ray wanted to hear more about these men. Ray also learned that the Inuit had items that belonged to the men, and Ray was able to purchase these items with the aid of Marco. These items included silverware and a plate. They had identifying information on them that linked the objects to officers who were with Franklin's expedition. At that time, men who served on ships would bring their own utensils and plates among other items. Ray's discovery was a huge step in solving a major mystery. The Inuit had something else to share as well. They stated that the men who died on King William Island had resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. But this news was almost too shocking for Ray to accept. It was 5 months after learning the fate of the Franklin expedition that John Rae provided his findings in Britain. His report was met with a great deal of criticism, especially from Lady Jane Franklin. Many were shocked that Rae would believe the Inuits' tale of the men resorting to cannibalism, and Lady Franklin was also furious with Rae for not doing a better investigation while in the Arctic region of Canada. He could have ventured to the location where the men had reportedly died. It was Lady Franklin's opinion that Rae wanted the reward money. Charles Dickens, the famous British writer, was a friend of Lady Jane Franklin and penned some scathing public letters about Rae's ridiculous claims because civilized men from Britain would never lower themselves to become cannibals. But Rae fired back with his public rebuttal and stood up for the Inuit people and their stories about the crew. By 1857, Lady Jane Franklin needed someone else to lead an expedition to find her husband and his crew. So she convinced Francis McClintock to take up the task and search the Arctic region of Canada. McClintock was a man with a great deal of naval experience. He'd even searched for the Erebus and Terror in 1848. McClintock was part of a search party led by James Ross Clark, a man with an impressive background in exploring the Arctic. The 1848 search had trouble navigating the ice in the Arctic, but they did land at Somerset Island, which is south of Devon Island, where Beechy Island is located. Unfortunately, though, their search uncovered nothing, and they returned to Britain. McClintock was called up in 1850 for another mission to the Arctic. He had plenty of experience on land and sea, so he didn't hesitate to take on the task. McClintock's next trip to the Arctic to find Franklin, the crew, and the missing ships began in 1857. Lady Jane purchased a ship for the mission and made sure it was properly fitted for McClintock's voyage to the Arctic. The vessel, a steam yacht named Fox, and McClintock sailed with a crew of 25 who were equipped with sleds to be pulled by a team of dogs across the tundra, and they were on their mission from 1857 until 1859. When McClintock reached the Arctic, he met with Inuit people who had in their possession personal items from the crew of the Erebus and Terror. They told McClintock that they believed one of the ships was destroyed near King William Island by the ice. McClintock had no choice but to explore the island for anything related to the fate of the expedition. They found more personal items from the crew, and they discovered one of the smaller boats that was used by the Erebus or Terror. That's where they found the crew's remains, along with their personal belongings that were scattered about. There was something else that was discovered by the McClintock crew. They found a pile of rubble or stone, and inside of that was a naval document in a tube that included the signatures of James Fitzjames and Francis Crozier. They examined what had been written, and it was shocking. The crew of the Erebus and Terror were at Beechy Island, but in September of 1846, they made their way to King William Island, where they would get trapped in ice for a second time. There was also some distressing news. The message they found was updated in April 1848, and it listed the names of 24 men who had died. And sadly, one of the men who had died was Sir John Franklin. Also written was that the surviving officers and crew, some 105 men in total, were making a difficult trek west across the frozen land towards the Back River. The Erebus and Terror were stuck in the ice until 1848, and they were tired of the situation. So walking across the frozen landscape was their last resort. McClintock returned to Britain with his findings, but it wasn't the last expedition to the Arctic to find the men. During the late 1800s, two Americans, Charles Francis Hall and Frederick Schwatka, made separate trips to find out what happened to the crew of the Erebus and Terror. With the aid of the Inuit community, Hall and Schwatka gathered more personal belongings from their crew, and they gathered vital information about the whereabouts of the ships. They also learned details of where the crews may have trekked to find assistance. Number 1. Later discoveries. Research and exploration continued into the 20th and 21st centuries for the Franklin expedition. Those buried on Beechy Island and the remains found on King William Island were examined for possible causes of death. Some tests showed that they had an astounding level of lead in their body. This meant that lead poisoning was the issue. But how in the world did it happen? Both the Erebus and the Terror had large supplies of canned food. The cans were also tested, and it provided an essential clue. Improper canning methods involved the use of lead. If the crew ate from the canned food, they were ingesting dangerous levels of the metal. The men were poisoned, and that resulted in weakness as well as a mental breakdown. At some point, the officers and crew of the ships may have realized that the cans were the problem. And if that were the case, they had no choice but to avoid eating the lead-contaminated food. Other issues like hypothermia and starvation only made things worse for the surviving members. This doesn't even include other diseases like scurvy or tuberculosis. One of the remains found on King William Island proved that the Inuit people were right about the claims of cannibalism. It was a last resort for the survival of these men. The Erebus and Terror eluded researchers for many years. but they were discovered between 2014 and 2016. The Erebus was the first to be located. Various governments and private organizations worked with the Inuit to search for the two ships. They've both since been found underwater, and the wreckage has been studied for years.
The Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste was a boat that left from New York City on November 7, 1872. On board the ship was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, the captain, as well as his wife and their 2-year-old daughter. There were 7 men on the crew with them, and their plan was to sail across the Atlantic to Italy. The ship's cargo had about 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. What happened next has led to a mystery that spanned over 150 years. A British ship, Dag Diesel, saw the Mary Celeste drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic. The Mary Celeste was found about 400 miles off the coast of the Azores, an island chain near Portugal. The crew of the Dag Diesel was shocked to see the ship. It had taken off just 8 days before the Dag Diesel set sail. They were curious, so they decided to board the Mary Celeste. When they got on the ship, they were dumbfounded. Not one person was on the Mary Celeste, and the lifeboat was gone. Also, the ship still had around 6 months' worth of food and water, which was plenty for the planned voyage. The cargo was also untouched. The boat had a flooding issue where 3 or so feet of water was on the ship's floor. That was not exactly a dire situation, and the crew could have repaired the responsible leak to stop the water coming inside. The Dag Diesel crew saw that the last log entry by Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs for the ship was made on November 25th. They decided to bring the ship over to Gibraltar, a British territory in Spain at the entrance of the Mediterranean Sea. The Mary Celeste was sent to be examined by the British Vice Admiralty Court. The reason they brought the boat to Gibraltar was to salvage it. By doing so, the crew was entitled to the insurance money claimed on the Mary Celeste. At the time, the insurance payout was roughly $46,000. Since the amount was so high, the British officers in Gibraltar were suspicious of the crew. Were they trying to pull a scam? Did they do something sinister to Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his family, and the crew of the Mary Celeste? A 3-month investigation led to no solid evidence of foul play. The insurance company still decided not to pay the full $46,000 to the crew of the Dag Diesel, just a smaller fraction. During the early 2000s, Anne McGregor and an oceanographer named Phil Richardson decided to investigate the fate of the Mary Celeste. Anne was driven by what she thought was nonsense that had been written about the Mary. So she decided to go out and find the truth for herself. What she found was fascinating and baffling. She found no evidence of a mutiny or even a pirate attack. If there was a mutiny, then the ship would have been in much worse condition. The vessel was by no means in danger from the flooding either. The captain and crew were experienced, and abandoning ship was the last thing they would have done in the Atlantic unless absolutely necessary. McGregor and Richardson's research led them to believe there were some equipment issues with the Mary. First, it's believed that the chronometer, a piece of equipment for navigation, was faulty and put them 120 miles west in the wrong direction. The flooding in the ship was more than likely caused by a few faulty ship pumps. They were found disassembled on the Mary, leading McGregor and Richardson to believe that Benjamin Spooner Briggs was worried about the flooding and wasn't sure if it would get progressively worse. Despite all of this coming out, the truth about what really happened on the Mary Celeste remains a mystery. Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife, his daughter, and the crew were never found. The North Korean ghost ships. A truly strange situation happened on the western coast of Japan during the late 2010s. Fishing vessels were found in the Sea of Japan by the Coast Guard. These ships were believed to be fishing boats from North Korea because of their unique markings. What was discovered on board the vessel shocked the Coast Guard. Human remains were nestled inside the boats. The crew died under mysterious circumstances, and their bodies were in an advanced stage of decomposition. The Japanese Coast Guard knew that North Korean fishing vessels often went out to catch squid and king crab. Sadly, North Korean boats are not equipped with proper equipment like GPS navigation systems or even reliable motors in case of emergencies. Another frustration for the Japanese is that North Korea refuses to send out any information about ships that have gone missing from their country. Those that go out are lost and never reported, which is heartbreaking for the families of the missing fishermen. Why were so many vessels being found with dread crews on board? One prevailing theory is that North Korea's sanctions from their nuclear program have caused a massive food shortage. Fishermen are forced to sail out further than usual and get larger hauls to ease the shortage. Another issue is that North Korea's need for cash led them to sell fishing rights off their coast to China. This means that Chinese boats are in competition with North Korean fishermen. Also, North Korea's government has allowed fishermen in their country to keep any surplus. These incentives have made desperate people make highly dangerous decisions. With food being short and equipment being less up to date, these fishermen are in over their heads. A lack of supplies and exposure are more than likely responsible for their deaths. In recent years, the Japanese have discovered North Korean vessels with fishermen still alive on board. However, the North Koreans are quickly sent back to their country. What's your favorite story about ghost ships? Let us know in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell for updates. The Octavius. It was mid to late 1775 when the captain of the Herald, a whaling ship, spotted a mysterious ship drifting alone somewhere off the coast of Greenland. The mystery vessel was the Octavius. It had been about 14 years since anyone had seen it. The rumor was that the Octavius had sailed from England to China. The captain of the ship allegedly made plans to find the famous Northwest Passage, a northern water route that linked the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The crew of the Herald decided to board the Octavius after spotting it. When they got on board, they were horrified by what they found. As they made their way down into the lower decks, they discovered the Octavius's 28-man crew. They were all dead. But they weren't just dead. Their bodies had frozen to death. Perhaps the creepiest discovery on the ship was the captain in his quarters. He was rumored to have been found sitting at his desk with a pen still in hand. The ship's logbook was in front of him. He too had frozen to death. When the Herald's crew looked around, they noticed an icy woman holding a young child. The horror was too much for the crew to thoroughly process. So, someone from the Herald grabbed the logbook as evidence and they got back on their boat as fast as possible. Sadly, pages from the logbook of the Octavius were lost, and the crew only had a few pages left as evidence of their discovery. When the log was reviewed, it was uncovered that the Octavius sailed north from China to Barrow, Alaska. Somehow, the vessel navigated the Arctic and made its way to Greenland. The Herald returned home not long after and shared their tale. The Octavius was not seen by anyone else afterwards. It's said that the last entry in the logbook for the Octavius read, 11th November 1762. We've now been enclosed in the ice 70 days. The fire went out yesterday, and our master has been trying ever since to kindle it again without success. His wife died yesterday. There is not relief. Beimo. The Beimo was a ship built in Sweden and launched in 1914. When it was constructed, it was named Angermanelfen, but was renamed Beimo around 1920 when it was purchased by the Hudson's Bay Company in Canada. This was a company that grew thanks to the fur trade and later in the retail industry. The Beimo was a ship that sailed at times to Scotland from Canada, but it also traveled throughout the Western Arctic. It would even deliver supplies to the Northwest Territories of Canada. During the winter, the ship docked in Vancouver. It was late 1931 when the Beimo was sailing from the Northwest Territories to Vancouver. The ship was caught in the middle of a horrible storm near Barrow, Alaska, and the crew decided to lay anchor to wait out the weather. They soon realized that they would have to spend the winter there and not Vancouver. The crew decided the ship was not a reasonable home to tough out the winter. Some of them left the ship and a few stayed on board. The crew left over had to make sure that ice didn't form around the rudder of the Beimo, so the ship could stay operational. November 1931 arrived, and another storm hit the area where the Beimo was anchored. The storm apparently sent the vessel adrift. Meanwhile, the captain and crew thought the ship had sunk. They later received news that the Beimo was spotted about 44 miles south of their location. It was stuck in ice, so they made their way over. It was cleared of its cargo, and the crew decided the Beimo would simply have to be stuck for the time being. But the boat had a different plan. It pulled the most amazing disappearing act. The captain and crew made it to Vancouver in 1932. They were ready to finish some paperwork about the ship when they learned that it was spotted 300 miles to the east of Barrow, Alaska. From 1933 until 1962, the Beimo was seen by multiple vessels. During this time, it was also boarded several times between 1933 and 1939. The ship was spotted again in 1962 by the Inuit in the Beaufort Sea. Finally, in 1969, the Beimo was seen frozen in an ice pack. That was the last time it was seen by someone. So what was the final fate of the Beimo? Well, it more than likely sunk and has yet to be discovered. Orang Madan. The story of the Orang Madan popped up in newspapers across the United States during the 1940s. Orang Madan comes from the Malay language and means man of Madan. There's a saying in the world of ship naming that naming a ship after a man is considered extremely bad luck. The Orang Madan may have tempted fate since it and its crew met an untimely demise. Some believe its story is true, while others claim it's simply a ghost story. We'll let you decide for yourself. Sometime during the 1940s, an Italian ship was sailing 400 miles southeast of the Marshall Islands when it picked up an SOS message from a boat called the Orang Madan. The message was, "We are floating. Second officer dead on bridge. Captain and chief engineer dead in chart room. Probably whole crew dead. Partly." The ship's last known position was also given. The Italian crew soon discovered that the Orang Madan was a ship used to transport Chinese troops. They tried to find it, but had no luck. The next day, they finally spotted the Madan about 50 miles from where the ship claimed to be. The Italian ship called out, but there was no response, so a few crew members decided to board the mysterious vessel. The Italian boarding crew was met with nothing but death. There were bodies everywhere, and they all had one thing in common. All those who were dead had horrific expressions on their faces. It was as if they experienced the ultimate horror seconds before their end. But what did they see? The Italians visited the wireless room next to where the operator was found dead. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew on board the Italian ship noticed something strange on the Orang Madan. Smoke was coming out of it. They called a warning out to the boarding party. The men then scrambled to escape the Orang Madan. They jumped into their boats right before an explosion set off on the Madan. 3 more explosions followed, and the ship sank as the Italians watched in horror. All that survived was their story. Sam Ratulangi PB 1600. It was late 2018 when the Sam Ratulangi PB 1600, a large container ship, was discovered 7 miles off the coast of Myanmar near the port town of Yangon. The Myanmar Navy decided to investigate. The Sam Ratulangi PB 1600 was in poor shape for a ship only built in 2001. It was pretty much a rusty old bucket. Strangely enough, there was no cargo or crew on board. The Sam Ratulangi PB 1600 was last reported near Taiwan about 9 years earlier. Because of this, the Myanmar Navy had a real mystery on their hands with what seemed to be a real-life ghost ship. Myanmar Navy officials learned that a tugboat was supposed to be bringing the Sam Ratulangi PB 1600 to a shipbreaking factory in Chittagong, Bangladesh. The business there involved dismantling ships for scrap. It's controversial due to the unsafe labor conditions seen in Bangladesh. But if someone is willing to risk their life in an unsafe business, they can potentially make a boatload of money. Literally, there were cables found in the head of the vessel, which led them to believe the ship was headed somewhere toward the tugboat. But where was it? Did the tugboat meet a similar fate? Were pirates involved? Did it sink during a storm? The tugboat, named the Independence, was later found along with its crew from Indonesia. The crew admitted to Myanmar Navy officials that they were pulling the Sam Ratulangi PB 1600, but it broke free during a storm. With that, the mystery was finally solved. 7. Fort Boyard. Nestled in the eerie silence of the Caspian Sea, a long-forgotten relic of the Soviet era stands as a haunting testament to a bygone era of military innovation. The abandoned Dag Diesel Plant, once a bustling Soviet weapon testing site, now rests in desolate isolation, frozen in time. This remote facility, often referred to as the Russian Fort Boyard, is a chilling reminder of the past. Aerial footage of the Dag Diesel Plant captured the unsettling solitude of this abandoned outpost, perched on the southern border of Russia's Dagestan, with a view extending over Kazakhstan. In its heyday, this sprawling 55,972 square foot complex played a pivotal role in the development of torpedoes and naval weaponry, housing a community of workers. The infrastructure, predominantly constructed from reinforced concrete foundations and metal structures, now lies in eerie silence. What was once a thriving facility, positioned about 2 miles offshore, boasted a range of amenities, including a hotel for its inhabitants, leisure facilities like a library, and even a basketball court. Dating back to its establishment in 1939, this 3-floor complex featured a commanding lookout tower and the modern comforts of its time, such as spacious living quarters and parquet floors. One of its remarkable engineering feats was the construction of the underwater section known as the Array, which was fabricated by the coast and then floated to its designated location before being submerged. However, this place of innovation and industry has been deserted for over half a century, left to deteriorate into a mere shell of its former glory. Today, the Dag Diesel Plant has found a new lease on life, but not as intended. It's become a haunting attraction for adventurous thrill-seekers eager to explore a lost world frozen in time. The site's chilling atmosphere, infused with a sense of abandonment, tells a story of forgotten military ambitions and the relentless march of time, making it a compelling destination for those drawn to the eerie remnants of a bygone era. 6. Pryyat, the abandoned Chernobyl city. In the haunting shadows of the Chernobyl nuclear station's catastrophic history is the abandoned city of Pryyat in Ukraine, where time's come to a standstill. Despite the grim legacy of the 1986 reactor meltdown that led to immense devastation, tours of the irradiated towns around Chernobyl are growing in popularity. Established in 1970 to house Chernobyl's workers, Pryyat was once a thriving city of 49,000 inhabitants. It boasted 15 primary schools, a vast hospital complex, numerous stores and gyms, as well as parks, cinemas, factories, and more. It was considered to be one of the most beautiful and luxurious cities in the Soviet Union. However, on April 27, 1986, the entire city was evacuated within 3 hours. This was initially meant as a test to see how much power the Chernobyl nuclear station needed to keep the number 4 reactor going in the event of a blackout, but things didn't go exactly as planned. During this test, the number 4 reactor caught fire, which quickly spread to other parts of the facility. Extensive damage was done to the building as a result. And what's even worse is that the fire caused radioactive chemicals to spill into the air, contaminating millions of square miles and putting countless people's lives at risk. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the explosion killed some 30 people, which doesn't seem like that many casualties. But combine that number with the several thousand cases of people who develop cancer, and you've got one of the worst disasters in nuclear history. Today, over 3 decades later, Pryyat remains a haunting time capsule of the Soviet Union in 1986. Communist propaganda still adorns the walls. Personal belongings litter the streets, and abandoned buildings stand as solemn witnesses to the past. The city's clock hands remain frozen at 11:55, marking the exact moment the electricity was cut. Contrary to popular belief, Pryyat was never completely abandoned. Military personnel, scientists, and public authorities have used the city as a base for radiation cleanup in the newly established exclusion zone. Remarkably, there's still electricity in some parts, a functional vehicle base, and even operational laundry facilities where workers' uniforms are cleaned. The absence of human presence has been surprisingly beneficial for wildlife, with animal populations thriving in the absence of human habitation. To explore Pryyat and the surrounding villages, visitors must obtain a day pass from the government, usually through tour agencies located in Kyiv, about 68 miles from the Chernobyl site. While safety concerns are relatively low, radiation levels are closely monitored during tours, and they're typically well below lethal doses. Despite the resilient spirit of Pryyat's eerie remnants, the city is gradually being reclaimed by encroaching forests. Time is steadily erasing the traces of human existence, foreshadowing a day when this abandoned city will be entirely consumed by Mother Nature. 5. The Paris Catacombs. Beneath the romantic facade of Paris lies a dark and chilling secret: the Paris Catacombs. This underground labyrinth holds a history that's both terrifying and fascinating. Constructed during the 14th century, these catacombs originated as quarries, providing the stone for iconic Parisian monuments, including majestic cathedrals. However, the price of mining was high, as sections of the ground weakened and collapsed over time. As the city's population surged, it faced a growing dilemma: overcrowded cemeteries and a surplus of waste. And in 1780, the situation reached a gruesome low when human remains were discovered in the basement of a local restaurant. To address the crisis, in 1786, the authorities initiated a covert operation to transfer the surplus remains from overflowing cemeteries into the catacombs. These eerie, clandestine nighttime activities gave the catacombs their first load of human remains. By the early 19th century, the catacombs had become the final resting place for around 6 million souls. The catacombs of Paris, with their dark, bone-filled passages, exude a haunting and unsettling aura. While tourists are now allowed to explore the designated sections, there exists an underground world beyond, accessible only to a secretive group known as cataphiles. These individuals trespass into the restricted catacomb areas, seeking adventure and even conducting ghost hunting expeditions. Venturing into these off-limit zones isn't only illegal, but also perilous. The uncharted catacombs can disorient and terrify trespassers, sometimes leading to tragic outcomes. The catacombs' mystique is undeniable, drawing in those who seek to explore their depths. In this subterranean realm, millions of souls rest in an eternal, eerie silence, a chilling reminder of the city's past. The Paris Catacombs remain an enigmatic and unsettling place where the boundary between life and death becomes blurred, making them a captivating yet foreboding destination for those drawn to the macabre and mysterious. 4. Xicheng. Beneath the tranquil waters of China's Qingdao Lake lies a submerged city known as Xicheng, or the Lion City, and its haunting presence is captivating to say the least. This ancient city was intentionally submerged in 1959, a casualty of industrialization when a hydroelectric dam was needed for Zhejiang province. Qingdao Lake, also called Thousand Island Lake, covers a vast 221 square miles and is named after its multitude of islands, of which there are over 1,000. Xicheng's haunting moniker, the Lion City, stems from its proximity to the Wuxi Mountain, which translates to 5 Lion Mountain in English. This submerged city, which had been inhabited for centuries, now serves as an underwater tourist attraction for adventurous travelers and diving enthusiasts. Built during the Tang dynasty in 621 AD, Xicheng boasts an age of nearly 1,400 years. The city's underwater preservation, resting 131 feet below the surface, has shielded its homes, temples, structures, and paved roads from the ravages of wind, rain, and sun. It's believed to be massive, likely spanning over 60 football fields, featuring an astounding 265 arches throughout the city. This lost city's distinctiveness extends to its architectural design, with 5 entrance gates, contrary to the usual 4, and intricate stonework dating back to the Ming and Qing dynasties. The city walls themselves trace their origins to the 16th century. In 2001, the Chinese government initiated an expedition to explore the submerged metropolis, and Xicheng was rediscovered. In 2011, images and descriptions published by Chinese National Geography piqued the public and researcher interest in this enigmatic sunken city. Divers and researchers have diligently documented Chang's well-preserved structures, carvings, guardian lions, and arches, making efforts to map and protect this underwater relic. As a result, Chang has been officially declared a historical relic under the protection of the Zhejiang province. The city's chilling and mesmerizing presence, frozen beneath the lake's surface, continues to intrigue and beckon those who seek to uncover the truth of the past. 3. Den Nut Gods. In the heart of Bruges in Belgium, there stands a house with a history that sends chills down the spine. Dating back to 1802, it was once part of a landscape that included a nunnery and an Augustinian monastery, divided by the gentle flow of the River Ray. These two holy institutions were rumored to be linked by an underground tunnel, a passage that remained unused as the monks and nuns crossed the river via a bridge. The tale takes a chilling turn when Hortense, a young novice on the path to becoming a nun, becomes the subject of forbidden desire. A young priest, tormented by his feelings for her, couldn't resist the allure. He discovered the long-forgotten underground passage, and temptation led him to the nunnery in search of Hortense. Hortense reciprocated his affections, but struggled with the forbidden love. The monk's nightly visits created a complicated and dangerous dance of desire. And as the tension mounted, he grew increasingly desperate and, some say, violent. Legend has it that the monk, ultimately consumed by his jealousy and anger, resorted to violence, stabbing Hortense and fleeing with her lifeless body. Soon after, the nuns began to witness the ghosts of their departed sisters, haunting the halls with their spectral presence. Some nuns, deeply disturbed by these apparitions, left and never returned. The ghost of a woman in white, and at times the monk, wandered the house, evoking an unsettling atmosphere. Centuries later, the Unlak family from England took residence in this eerie house, only to experience encounters with these vengeful spirits. Seeking answers, they enlisted the help of a medium named Eglinton. As Eglinton delved into the spiritual realm, he was stricken with convulsions and nearly fell into a coma. But during this harrowing experience, he claimed to have communicated with the ghosts of the ill-fated nun and priest. The priest confessed to a tragic tale of love gone awry, admitting to stabbing Hortense and burying her lifeless body. He beseeched Eglinton to pray for him, acknowledging his dreadful deed. The nun's ghost corroborated the priest's confession and urged Eglinton to pray for her killer, although she refused to reveal his name, stating only that he was Italian and 31 years old. To this day, the spirits of the nun in her white dress and the remorseful priest are said to linger on the property. They're never seen together and vanish around midnight, destined to wander the grounds eternally searching for their lost love. A haunting tale that lingers in the very walls of the Bruges haunted house. 2. Rolling Hills Asylum. In East Bethany, New York, the Rolling Hills Asylum is a place with a chilling history that's earned it a reputation as one of the most haunted sites in the state and the world. Established on January 1, 1827, this former asylum has a legacy marked by horrifying tales and at least 1,700 documented deaths over 2 centuries. Originally known as the Genesee County Poorhouse, Rolling Hills Asylum was a refuge for the mentally and physically disabled, as well as widows, orphans, and anyone struggling financially or unable to care for themselves. It served as a place of last resort for the most vulnerable in society, but many who entered its doors never left. With an overwhelming number of people passing through, nearly 2,000 documented deaths are recorded, but there are countless more undocumented fatalities shrouded in mystery and despair. The notoriety of Rolling Hills Asylum as a paranormal hotspot has made it a subject of fascination and fear, earning it a spot on various television shows, including Ghost Asylum, Ghost Hunters, Destination Fear, Paranormal Challenge, and even a promotion for FX's American Horror Story Asylum. This abandoned institution carries with it a palpable aura of the unknown, drawing in those who seek to explore its gruesome past. The asylum is now privately owned by Sharon Coyle, who, after experiencing paranormal activity during her visit in 2008, felt a deep connection to the place. Determined to preserve its history and the stories of the lost souls who once resided there, she took ownership of the property, ensuring that its legacy endures. Today, Rolling Hills Asylum opens its doors to the public on select dates in October, inviting the curious to learn about its history and for the brave to engage in respectful encounters with lingering spirits. A self-guided 3-hour tour, known as a psych hold, allows visitors to explore the expansive 60,000 square foot building, providing a glimpse into the unsettling history that lingers within its abandoned walls. 1. Ross Island. In the midst of the Indian Ocean, over 800 miles from mainland India, lies the eerily abandoned Ross Island. Measuring less than 1/3 of a square mile, this small speck of land harbors a chilling history and is now shrouded in a thick blanket of lush foliage. The remnants of a once thriving British colonial settlement are entwined within massive ficus tree roots, while a grand ballroom where couples once waltzed stands overrun by nature. Ross Island's sinister past dates back to the aftermath of the Indian Mutiny in 1857, a pivotal moment in India's struggle for independence. In response to the rebellion, British colonists established a remote penal settlement on the Andaman and Nicobar archipelago to quell dissent. Dr. James Patterson Walker arrived on the archipelago in 1858, along with 200 convicts and rebels, and designated Ross Island as the administrative headquarters for this colonial complex. What followed was an era marked by unspeakable cruelty and brutalization of convicts and political prisoners. Inmates, often suffering from diseases like malaria and cholera, were forced to transform the once impenetrable, humid forests into a colonial paradise. They constructed lavish structures, including a commissioner's bungalow and a Presbyterian church adorned with stained glass windows from Italy. Ross Island's colonial overlords enjoyed manicured gardens, tennis courts, and swimming pools, while the prisoners lived in overcrowded, disease-ridden conditions. As the Indian independence movement gained momentum in the early 20th century, the need for a proper prison led to the construction of the infamous cellular jail in Port Blair, known for its brutal treatment of Indian prisoners. While the cellular jail closed in 1937, Ross Island's tragic history continued. A powerful earthquake in 1941 resulted in more than 3,000 deaths and severe damage to the island. And shortly after, Japanese forces occupied the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, pillaging Ross Island for resources and constructing bunkers. The Allied forces retook the islands in 1945, leading to the permanent dissolution of the penal colony. Today, Ross Island is administered by the Indian government and serves as a haunting tourist attraction. Nature has reclaimed the land, with gnarled trees enveloping buildings, leaving only the roofless walls as remnants of a once successful colonial past. But beneath the island's picturesque facade lies the forgotten story of decades of colonial oppression, a dark chapter in the history of the British Empire. Ross Island, once hailed as the Paris of the East, now stands as an unlikely memorial to the suffering of the oppressed. Which one of these creepy abandoned places would you dare to explore yourself? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.